Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my top 36 flex rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, over the course of today's video, as I talk about these 36 prospects, regardless of position, whether they are running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, or quarterbacks, I'm going to be presenting information and statistics and facts that I've gathered this offseason that will hopefully lead to your informed decisions as you approach your 2023 fantasy football drafts. Before we get into today's content, a couple reminders. Again, every single rankings video I post on this channel is for a half PPR scoring format, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a standard league or a full PPR league. Additionally, if you want to hear more information, more statistics regarding these players, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season with the singular goal of trying to help you win fantasy football championships. So if you want to hear more information about these guys, I'm sure it's on the channel. We posted rankings by position already earlier last week. So if you want to hear me talk about some of these players for 3 to 5 minutes, you can find that content here on the channel. Additionally, besides the strength of schedule tier list, best draft strategy videos coming on later this month, we have daily fantasy football content throughout the entirety of the regular season, whether it's positional rankings, live streams on Sunday mornings, trade prospects, rest of season strength of schedule, all that kind of jazz in order to help you win. So be sure to subscribe today. Our goal is 100,000 subscribers this year, so hopefully we can get there with your help. Thank you very much. Additionally, for those of you who want more advantages upon your league mates besides just the channel itself, be sure to go ahead and travel down to the description of the video and click on the link that heads on over to Underdog Fantasy. If you sign up today using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get that deposit match up to $100, you're additionally going to get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. The draft guide is for all 4 primary positions: quarterback, tight end, running back, and wide receiver. Hundreds of hours of information that I've collected to lead to your best overall decision making in your upcoming drafts. Additionally, the rankings that are within this draft guide are for 4-point per passing touchdown, 6-point per passing touchdown, half PPR, full PPR, all positions, including kickers and defenses, by tier, ready to go. These rankings are updated every single week, so be sure to keep an eye out on your spam folder because you're going to receive multiple emails from me, not only this offseason, but going into the regular season. Because once you use code Andrew and make that first-time deposit throughout the entirety of the season, every single Sunday morning, I'm going to be sending you weekly rankings for half and full PPR by position, by tier, in order to help you make decisions on Sunday mornings and of course win a championship. So be sure to check that out today. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible, the map on the right side of the screen should lead you to that. If you're not potentially eligible, you can check out the link to my Patreon down in the description. But if you are eligible, of course, get drafting today, gain some experience, and draft responsibly via Underdog. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about my top 36 flex players for the 2023 fantasy football season, beginning with Justin Jefferson. Yes, this is a half PPR scoring format, but in terms of consistency, in terms of upside, Justin Jefferson is above all players in my eyes. Justin Jefferson set career highs last season in terms of targets, receptions, and receiving yards. When we talk about the potential of Justin Jefferson, earning the Triple Crown this upcoming season, it is absolutely without a doubt on the table. He has demonstrated that he is an elite level talent, and with Kirk Cousins can absolutely dominate. Last season, there were 11 games in which Justin Jefferson had 10 or more targets with Kirk Cousins under center. In those games, Justin Jefferson was averaging 23.88 fantasy points per game. That is an unbelievable number, and he's only getting better year over year. Last season, he was inconsistent at times. In fact, throughout the regular season, had 5 performances of less than 5 fantasy points. I think that those overall performances are going to be rarer this upcoming season, and when they are, when he has far less dud performances, his overall baseline and upside within a given week certainly make him the most valuable prospect in fantasy football. Moving on to Christian McCaffrey, our number 2. Last season, as soon as he joined the San Francisco 49ers, he took over, was the number 1 overall back for the remainder of the season. And in the 12 games he played for the 49ers, including the playoffs, in which he played 50% or more of the offensive snaps, this guy was averaging 20.31 fantasy points per game, 15 rushing attempts, 6 targets per game, so 21 opportunities, and 20 specific touches per game. Now, I know many of you are concerned about his health, and I get it, but you got to look at last season. He played 20 consecutive games, regular season plus playoffs, fully healthy, ready to go. I'm not worried about him. He's a very unique player because of his contributions in terms of the receiving work. Amongst all players in the National Football League, he really is one of the rarest because he doesn't even have to find the end zone and he can be successful. In the last 13 games in which Christian McCaffrey did not score a touchdown, the guy's still averaging 16.38 fantasy points per game, a one-of-a-kind talent at the position. Moving on, let's talk about Austin Eckler, a guy that has been the number 1 and number 2 ranked player within his position the last 2 seasons. Of course, within the last 2 years, averaging 19.03 fantasy points per game, having scored 38 total touchdowns in the last 33 games. This is an offense that obviously has gotten Austin Eckler heavily involved. And last season, he set the record for the second most receptions by a running back within the regular season with 107 receptions. It's a really high number, but got to take into account Mike Williams missed 5 games last year. Keenan Allen practically missed 9 games last year. And when we approach the 2023 season, we're expecting far less of a target share, far less receptions overall, especially with Kellen Moore coming in. Sure, Austin Eckler is going to be extremely relevant. Is he going to be as good as last year? No, regression is going to occur. But with a healthy offensive line, healthy receiving core to alleviate some of the pressure in terms of running the ball, and of course, a healthy quarterback. We know that Justin Herbert was injured with that rib cartilage injury for majority of last season. This offense is only going to be better, potentially more efficient, and so will Austin Eckler. Moving on, let's talk about our number 4, the thumbnail for today's episode. We have Tyreek Hill. Now, Tyreek Hill is ranked as a top 6 wide receiver in 4 out of the last 5 seasons. The only season in which he wasn't able to accomplish that was back in 2019 when he missed a handful of games. So anytime he's been fully healthy, regardless of whether he's been on the Chiefs or the Miami Dolphins, this guy's a top 6 ranked wide receiver. Now, specifically last year with the Miami Dolphins setting career highs in a lot of statistics that we would have thought he would have been able to accomplish at a higher rate with a guy like Patrick Mahomes, Tua was just enough for what Tyreek Hill needed at the quarterback position, and he absolutely dominated. In the 10 healthy games in which Tua participated in last year, where he didn't leave early with an injury and there wasn't any concussion or anything like that, Tyreek Hill was averaging 20.00 half PPR fantasy points per game with Tua in those 10 contests. Throughout those 10 contests, Tyreek Hill had a 36.25% target rate, which is targets over route run. So again, you know he's getting himself the ball a very consistent amount of times. He is the number 1 option within this offense and will continue to be so. For those of you who were worried about Tua's deep passing game, he was number 1 amongst all quarterbacks last season in terms of adjusted passing completion percentage, in terms of attempts 20 or more yards down the field amongst all quarterbacks. A pretty good statistic, and of course, will continue momentum this year in 2023. Let's move on to Ja'Marr Chase, our number 5. Ja'Marr Chase, very similar to Justin Jefferson, his former college teammate at LSU. They're both improving every single season. Now, last year, he saw a huge boost in terms of overall targets, going from his rookie season of averaging about 7.5 targets to nearly 11.5 targets this last season. So if those numbers continue to stay consistent and his catch rate goes up, Ja'Marr Chase is in line for 170 potential targets in 2023. And with those level of opportunities, he should be able to be a consistent enough option, regardless of the fact that T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd exist within this offense. Because when you look at his averages over the last 2 years, 16.41 fantasy points per game. If we get a little bit more efficient, increase the catch rate, Ja'Marr Chase can absolutely get into the range of scoring 18 fantasy points per game. And in comparison to all the prospects that we have yet to mention on today's episode, he certainly has a high ceiling. He's just a safer option based on the quarterback play that he's associated with and the offense he's associated with. Therefore, Ja'Marr Chase takes the number 5 spot. Now, the last that I wanted to mention regarding Ja'Marr Chase, in the last 2 seasons, any game in which he's had 8 or more targets, the guy's averaging 18.43 fantasy points per game. He's been able to accomplish 8+ targets in 20 of the games that he's played in his career. That's 71%. Pretty high rate overall. Hopefully, more targets to come this upcoming season. Let's go on to number 6, Cooper Kupp. I have moved Cooper Kupp down slightly in terms of my overall wide receiver rankings because, again, there is a significance to the hamstring injury that he did sustain this offseason already, and there could be potential re-injury of that. Hopefully they're going to keep him off the field rehabbing, and then once he's ready to go, he'll be fine. Because if he's ready to go and we get a full season of Cooper Kupp x Matthew Stafford, it is going to be unstoppable. Cooper Kupp last season, weeks 1 through 9, the number 1 overall wide receiver in fantasy football, averaging 20.31 fantasy points per game. Was better than Justin Jefferson, better than Tyreek Hill, better than Ja'Marr Chase. And to be totally honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Cooper Kupp finishes the number 1 overall wide receiver this season. He just needs to stay healthy. In the last 2 years with Matthew Stafford, 10+ targets, 22 different times. It's a 76% rate, averaging 23 fantasy points per game. Cooper Kupp is an unstoppable force. He's just got to be healthy. Now let's begin with our 7 through 12 ranked players, beginning with Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is going to see an unimpeded volume of opportunity. And this isn't the first time you're going to hear that string of words. You're going to hear that probably the next 5 minutes consistently based on the running backs that we talk about. But last season, Saquon Barkley was given 76% of the running back opportunities the New York Giants had. In terms of opportunities, we're talking about rushing attempts and total targets. So when you give a player 70+% of their backfield potential opportunities, it often leads to success in the National Football League. We have only seen 11 running backs have 70% or more of their backfield opportunities since 2018. 10 of those 11 running backs finished as top 7 running backs in their given season. There is a lot of upside here. When we look back at Saquon Barkley's 2022 season, in games in which he had 15 or more touches, again, that was 14 of the 16 regular season games he participated in, the guy was averaging 17.39 half PPR fantasy points per game. An incredible talent with a lot of opportunity on hand. Moving on to Bijan Robinson, the rookie wonder that hopefully will have a rookie season very complimentary of what Saquon Barkley did back in 2018. But specifically, Bijan Robinson is a top-tier talent. There's a reason why they spent the 8th overall selection on him. And throughout the history of fantasy football, in the last decade, the running backs that we have seen drafted within the first 8 selections have consisted of Saquon, Fournette, Zeke, and McCaffrey. These running backs in their rookie seasons, all top 12, and as a group averaged about 260 fantasy points in their rookie year. Bijan Robinson should hopefully be able to live up to that expectation based on the fact that he's associated with an offensive line that is elite in terms of run blocking. Arthur Smith, who helped this team as a play caller and head coach to have the second most running back rushing attempts amongst all teams in the National Football League, and in fact, we're the only team in the NFL that had more running back rushing attempts than quarterback passing attempts last season. Now, we know that Bijan Robinson will absolutely be able to get it done on the ground. Through the air, in the last 3 seasons at college at Texas, had 77 targets lead to 59 receptions, 700 plus receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. You go back to 2021, Cordero Patterson and Mike Davis within this backfield for the Atlanta Falcons, they consisted of 106 targets that were either behind the line of scrimmage or within 0 to 9 yards downfield. There's going to be a 3-back monster here with Bijan Robinson. Should be incredible. Moving on to Nick Chubb. Speaking of being a 3-back monster, Nick Chubb has a full volume of opportunity within this backfield. No more Kareem Hunt, no more D'Ernest Johnson. I mean, really, the only other backups are guys that have not played or have minimal experience in the National Football League, which leads us to believe that Nick Chubb should be a 3-down back. And his running backs coach this offseason has even been quoted to say he's going to be the first, second, and third down guy. Obviously, we knew that. Now, being a third down guy within this offense isn't the most valuable, considering on average for the last 3 seasons with Kevin Stefanski as the head coach and primary play caller, they've only targeted their running backs about 86 times per season. But we're still going to find value with Nick Chubb because this team since 2020 has the second most rushing attempts amongst running backs, the most rushing yards at the running back position, and of course the second most running back rushing touchdowns. They're going to give him opportunity, and any time in the last 3 seasons Chubb has played 50% or more of the offensive snaps, the guy's averaging 17.25 fantasy points per game. A perfect opportunity this upcoming season. Moving on to Derrick Henry. Now, Derrick Henry has been unstoppable, and to be totally honest, having him as my number 10 overall player is perhaps quite disrespectful, considering in the last 4 seasons, he has been either the number 3, number 2, number 4 ranked player, and back in 2021, prior to his season-ending injury, was the number 1 overall running back at the position. So there is a lot of upside for this guy to just be himself and once again be a top 5 running back. And hopefully he is, to be totally honest, because since we have seen Ryan Tannehill take over the starting quarterback position in 2019 for the Tennessee Titans, we have seen Derrick Henry averaged 24.98 touches per game and 20.38 fantasy points per game in the last 44 contests. In the last 55 games that we have seen Derrick Henry participate, including playoffs, we're talking about 60 touchdowns in those 55 games. Overall, we are going to see a lot of success from this offense, especially now that they're incorporating Derrick Henry into a role where he's getting far more receptions, leading to career highs in 2022 in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. If you expand his overall contributions, I don't care what age he is, Derrick Henry is a future Hall of Fame running back. He is one of one. He is an absolute Terminator on the field, and he should be treated as such when we're drafting. Moving on, let's talk about Travis Kelce. I absolutely, without a doubt, can justify drafting Travis Kelce ahead of a Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb based on positional drop-off of value. When we talk about who's going to score more points, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley should all be able to outscore Travis Kelce in a half PPR scoring format. But the separation of value between the number 1 and number 3 ranked tight end, for example, is so significant in comparison to what Henry presents and another running back you get later in the rounds that overall, it leads to a justified idea of drafting Travis Kelce. Just putting it out there. Either way, he's my number 11. He's been the number 1 overall tight end in 6 out of the last 7 seasons. But in terms of his overall production, regardless of his current position, Fantasy point wise, he's been incredible. With Patrick Mahomes since 2020, averaging 15.38 fantasy points per game. Has scored 10 or more touchdowns in 4 out of the last 5 seasons. And there's an even bigger target vacancy going into this offseason with 135 vacated targets with no more Juju and no more McCole Hardman. Travis Kelce is an automatic to probably score once again 250 to 260 fantasy points, if not more, if him and Patrick Mahomes continue to tear apart the National Football League. Moving on to our number 12, we have Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs, in terms of his overall consistency in the last 3 years, as soon as he became a member of the Buffalo Bills, has been the number 4, 7, and 3 ranked wide receiver. Last season was averaging 16.41 fantasy points per game, and that was even with Josh Allen taking a little bit of a step back in the second half of the season due to the elbow injury. That all being said, when you're associated with Josh Allen, a quarterback that has had himself a minimum of 4,200 passing yards and 35 passing touchdowns in each of the last 3 seasons, regardless of how this offense wants to, utilize their scheme with Ken Dorsey, they're going to find success. And of course, Stefon Diggs is going to be the number 1 target within this offense. Now we're moving on to the second technical round of our upcoming drafts as we talk about our number 13, Tony Pollard. Now, Tony Pollard is in a position to have a lot of opportunity to lead to his overall success in his career. Since 2019, any games in which Tony Pollard has played 50% of the offensive snaps or more, the guy's averaging 18.16 fantasy points per game. Additionally, in the 3 games he has played in his career without Ezekiel Elliott in the lineup, he has averaged 27.23 fantasy points per game. We have seen Tony Pollard be an efficient running back, to say the very least. In fact, since 2019, he's averaged a 5.13 yard per carry average, which is top 10 overall at the running back position with 400 attempts minimum in terms of all-time running backs in the National Football League. We all know Tony Pollard is a very special player. He's associated with a very efficient offense. And now that you pluck out Ezekiel Elliott and his contributions from last season consisting of 231 rushing attempts and 12 rushing touchdowns, having a 9-streak game last season in which he had 1 rushing touchdown minimum from week 6 through 17. If those opportunities go in the direction of Tony Pollard, he doesn't have to absorb all 231 rushing attempts, but if he gets those goal line carries, it'll be all she wrote. Tony Pollard could be a top 5 back if nobody else joins this backfield this offseason. Moving on to Josh Jacobs, our number 14. Now, I know he's currently not at training camp, but when I compare him to Jonathan Taylor, I have far more confidence of Josh Jacobs rejoining the team and them finding a deal this offseason. That being said, every single year of Josh Jacobs' career, he's always been an RB1. I've mentioned this for the last 3 consecutive years and will continue to do so. In his rookie season, prior to the injury, was averaging 13.97 fantasy points per game, was the number 11 overall running back throughout that span of time. In 2020, played every single game of the season, was the number 8 overall back. 2021, early in the season, was dealing with turf toe, but from weeks 4 through 18, averaged 13 fantasy points per game and was the number 7 overall back. Last season, obviously put together the best season of his career probably that we'll ever see from Josh Jacobs. Legendary performances as the number 3 overall back, averaging 17.75 fantasy points per game. The difficult thing about, potentially tailing on that season is the fact that we're going to see regression. As to how much, we'll see. It's certainly going to be a hefty amount, considering he had 393 total touches last season, which is a very difficult number to repeat. In the history of fantasy football and running backs in specific, the last time we saw running backs repeat 390 or more total touches within a season was LaDainian Tomlinson and Ricky Williams back in the 2002-2003 season. So it's been quite a while, so we're probably not going to see him repeat in terms of those numbers this upcoming season. That being said, Josh Jacobs, since 2019, this guy, whenever he's been given 15 or more touches, which is 47 of his last 60 regular season games, he's averaging 16.94 fantasy points per game. An incredible talent, to say the least. Moving on to number 15, we have A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, as soon as he joined this Philadelphia Eagles offense, I knew, considering his best friend is Jalen Hurts, even prior to the trade, they were going to have an incredible connection. Of course, set career highs in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and fantasy points, averaging 15.04 fantasy points per game with the Philadelphia Eagles throughout the regular season last year. Obviously, incredible production, whether it was, before the catch, after the catch. Last season, 565 receiving yards after the catch. Again, that's number 6 amongst all receiving options. He had 1,754 air yards, number 4 amongst all wide receiver options. In terms of deep receiving game and being able to score, 7 touchdowns, 20 or more yards down the field, thanks to Jalen Hurts, of course, being number 3 in terms of passing touchdowns, 20 or more yards down the field. Of course, he had 11 of those last season. This is a deep ball receiving threat, someone that can catch a slant and go to the house. We know how talented he is, and we know the offense that he's associated with, and the fact that his quarterback is quite literally his best friend. the sky's the limit for H.A. Brown once again. Moving on, we have CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb last year, de facto number one with no Amari Cooper, absolutely dominated, especially when Dak was under center. From week 7 through 18 with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb averaged 16.1 fantasy points per game and was the number 3 overall wide receiver in terms of total fantasy points and fantasy points per game on average throughout that span of time. Now, in terms of opportunity within this team, we are going to see an even bigger target vacancy with no more Zeke, Dalton Schultz, Noah Brown, T.Y. Hilton. That's 195 targets up for grabs. And when we see Brandon Cooks join the mix, sure, he'll get himself a couple sprinkles of, targets here and there. And so will whoever is that tight end, whether it is, Jake Ferguson or someone else, they're going to see some targets. But I ultimately do expect to see CeeDee Lamb take another step forward in terms of being the de facto number one of this Cowboys offense and have himself a fantastic year. Moving on to number 17, we have Davante Adams. Now, Davante Adams, I'm a little bit hesitant about, mainly because of his association with Jimmy Garoppolo. If Jimmy Garoppolo does not funnel target Davante Adams, we could have a rough year. But that being said, Davante Adams has proven throughout his career he can be quarterback proof. 4 out of the last 5 seasons, Davante Adams has been a top 3 ranked wide receiver in fantasy football. The only year that he didn't accomplish that, he was injured for 4 games and put on the injured reserve. So I understand there may be some hesitancy even with myself with Jimmy Garoppolo, but we have to trust the talent of Davante Adams. Again, he was able to get the job done late last season, week 17, with a no-name quarterback against the San Francisco 49ers defense. I know the name of the quarterback, it was Jarrett Stidham. I get it, but still, the entire point is he's quarterback proof, and hopefully Jimmy Garoppolo can help him succeed, because last year averaging 16.79 fantasy points per game was a huge plus for many of our fantasy teams. We're hoping for that once again. Moving on, we have number 18, Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson was a part of the worst Patriots offense we have witnessed in 20 years in terms of total touchdowns and total rushing touchdowns. They have the lowest number since 2002 and 2003. Pretty crazy. Now you bring in Bill O'Brien to be the new offensive coordinator. We know that Mac Jones will take steps forward to improve this upcoming season, but hopefully he won't improve too much, because the volume of targets that he sent in the running backs' directions last season in the 13 games in which he was a starter, he targeted the running back position 7.31 times per game. So hopefully we'll continue to see that number grow with no more Damian Harris in this backfield. Of course, we're going to see Ramondre Stevenson eat. Last season, in the games in which he had 15 or more touches, was averaging 16.16 fantasy points per game. And in fact, from week 6 through 18, when Damian Harris began to get those injuries, we saw Ramondre Stevenson for the remainder of that season be the number 10 overall back in fantasy football. I'm hoping for more of the same in 2023. Moving on. Now, before we get into talking about these players, a reminder, if you guys have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season. Of course, I'm going to be sending out a bunch of information every single episode, like I have already thus far, in order to help you guys make the most informed decisions on your upcoming draft. So be sure to go ahead, click that like button down below, of course, but be sure to subscribe. Help us get to our goal of 100,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into our number 19. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the receiving option probably this season that I'm going to plant a flag on. Probably do some stupid things in my upcoming drafts and take him far earlier than I need to, just because he's my favorite receiver in the game right now. Since week 13 of the 2021 season, Amon-Ra St. Brown has had 6 or more receptions in 18 of the last 20 games he has played. That's a 90% success rate of 6 or more receptions. In those games, averaging 17.77 fantasy points per game. When we talk about the target vacancy that we are going to witness from the Detroit Lions, with, of course, the suspension of Jameson Williams, no more Jamal Williams, no more TJ Hawkinson, and no more DJ Chark, there is so much opportunity. I honestly believe that Amon-Ra St. Brown has the potential of being a top 5 wide receiver. He's just got to find the end zone a fair amount of times, and the rest will get this job done, because Jared Goff loves to target his slot receivers, even going back to Cooper Kupp in the past. All right, moving on to our number 20, we have Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor right now is not with the team. He is not at practice. He is currently not at training camp at all. In fact, rehabbing, because there is a little bit of an injury that he sustained this offseason. We're hearing a lot of motion this offseason in terms of potentially Dalvin Cook going there, maybe even Kareem Hunt. We know that Zach Moss, the backup running back for this team that they traded for last season in the exchange in which they lost Nyheim Hines and, of course, acquired Zach Moss. We did see Zach Moss break his arm this offseason, so if they are in need of a running back, do not be surprised for one to be signed. But if Jonathan Taylor is healthy and he returns to practice, do not forget this is a guy that ranked as the number 4 and number 1 overall running back in 2020 and 2021. in a half PPR scoring format. He has top 3 upside at the position, especially with the offense that he is associated with, behind the offensive line that he's associated with. And now that you bring in a zone option read quarterback like Anthony Richardson, there is even better opportunities for him to have more upside, considering the math on the defensive end changes. That backside defensive end can't just crash down the line of scrimmage. He has to respect the fact that, of course, Anthony Richardson has the ability to pull the ball and get moving. Throughout Jonathan Taylor's career since his rookie year, anytime he's played 50% or more of the offensive snaps, the guy's averaging 19.21 fantasy points per game. He is elite. He's just got to be healthy and ready to play for the Colts this year. Moving on to our number 21, Garrett Wilson. We talked about him in yesterday's episode. Whenever he has had average quarterback play, whether it's Flacco or Mike White, 14.23 fantasy point per game average, 8 games last season, which he's had average play. The rest of the time with Zach Wilson, complete disaster. Now we go into 2023 and we inject Aaron Rodgers into this lineup. Aaron Rodgers' number 1 receivers on his team since 2008 have averaged 131 targets, 86 receptions, 1,186 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns per season. Obviously, Garrett Wilson's going to take steps forward, and we should expect that, considering, we know that Aaron Rodgers is going to have to get the ball out of his hands quickly, considering that offensive line is terrible for the New York Jets. So expect Garrett Wilson close to the line of scrimmage, dominating in the slot position, and of course, finding himself a lot of value after the catch. Moving on to our number 22, Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle, throughout his career with Tua healthy, has averaged 14.77 fantasy points per game. Now, specifically last season with a healthy Tua, he didn't take huge steps forward, averaging just 14.87 fantasy points per game. But because of Tyreek Hill's overall presence there, Tyreek Hill's getting a lot of targets, but he's also allowing a guy like Jalen Waddle to pull second coverage. He's pulling the second best corner of every team. He's not getting, coverage over the top by a safety. If someone's going to play cover 2, they're mainly going to shift towards the side of Tyreek Hill because of the threat of speed. But Jalen Waddle has proved to us that he absolutely can be a threat on every single down. Last season, going from a 7.08 dot his rookie year to a 12.2, that is an incredible increase in terms of average depth of target. If his opportunities are further and further down the field, we already know that this offense can justify supporting 2 top 12 receivers, because they did it last season, and they'll potentially be able to once again do it this year, especially with a Tua that is fully healthy for the entirety of the 2023 year. Moving on to our number 23. Speaking of 2023, we have Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon this upcoming season is going to have an unimpeded volume of opportunity. With no more Samaje Perine, we know that Joe Mixon could be of value. I mean, purely because of the receiving work he is going to witness, it is going to be crazy. But we know that Joe Mixon, since 2018, since joining the league, this guy has been the number 13 or better overall running back in the National Football League every single season. As long as he stays healthy, he has been a valuable fantasy prospect. In the last 2 seasons alone, averaging 20.13 touches per game and 15.88 fantasy points per game in the last 30 regular season games. If you give him opportunity, specifically 18 plus touches in a game, he's averaging 19 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. Last season set a career high in terms of targets and receptions per game. On pace for 91 total targets and 73 receptions. That was even with Samaje Perine in the lineup getting himself opportunity. We could very easily see Joe Mixon catch the ball 75 plus times this year, which makes him extremely valuable for fantasy purposes. Moving on, Travis Etienne. Now, just a couple days ago, Doug Peterson, the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars and primary play caller, came out and said, last season it was Travis Etienne's rookie year technically, because his technical rookie year back in 2021 was littered with that Liz Frank injury. He did not play a single game. So he was really learning for majority of the 2022 season. They had to teach him how to, of course, read blocks, anticipate, openings within the offensive line, approach the offensive line with square shoulders. So when you see the hole, you can attack it and just burst through. Now, there were also some mentions at the end of this entire, interview with Doug Peterson, which he said, last season we were looking at Travis Etienne getting 11, 12, 1,300 rushing yards. Now we're pushing towards him being able to probably get 16 or 17 this upcoming season. That volume that Travis Etienne is going to have to accumulate in order to kind of get that kind of yardage is going to be, RB1 status. He's going to have to see himself 250 rushing attempts. It's not going to be hard, considering this team, had the 5th most running back rushing attempts amongst all teams in the National Football League last year. So I do expect Travis Etienne to be a top 12 back, even with the coexistence of Tank Bigsby. Without J-Rob in this lineup last season, we saw Travis Etienne handle 18.6 touches per game, which led to 13.61 fantasy points per game throughout the 10 games in which he played without J-Rob. And if we take those averages that he produced and put it on a 17-game pace, the guy would have been the number 7 overall back last season. Travis Etienne has a lot of potential, especially if he's getting a lot of opportunity on the ground and especially through the air, because we know he's an accomplished receiving option. Let's move on to our number 25 through 36 ranked players. Beginning with our number 25, we have Chris Olave. We talked about him yesterday. When you are in association with a Derek Carr offense, the last three top receivers for Derek Carr: Waller with 107 receptions back in 2020, Renfro with 103 receptions back in 2021, and Adams last season with 100 receptions. In terms of value, Derek Carr has been able to support a top 11 fantasy wide receiver in each of the last 3 seasons in a half PPR scoring format. Chris Olave is going to make that year 2 jump. I talked about it at the beginning of yesterday's episode in terms of must draft receiving options. Year 2 wide receivers that can be top 36 ranked, first round picks who have averaged over 8.5 fantasy points in their rookie year, all make improvements and make huge ones at that, about 20% in all statistics and about 12% in terms of total touchdowns within a given year. I'm expecting Chris Olave, with the implementation of Derek Carr being a great deep passing quarterback, to take further steps into becoming a top 12 receiving option in 2023. All right, let's talk about the first quarterback that I expect to see coming off the board. I'd like to draft Josh Allen in the beginning of the 3rd round. If I can get him at number 26, that'd be fantastic, considering this is a quarterback that, if in fact we didn't see that Cincinnati Bengals game get canceled, he would have been the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback for 3 consecutive seasons. No other quarterback has more seasons of 395 or more fantasy points than Josh Allen in the history of fantasy football. Patrick Mahomes has 2 of those seasons, but Josh Allen has 3. And he is continuing to show up and show out. The last 3 seasons, minimum of 4,200 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns, has dominated on the ground in terms of the last 3 seasons, averaging 675 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns per year. Incredible numbers, to say the very least. I mean, even prior to his elbow injury last season, Josh Allen was the number 1 overall quarterback in fantasy points per game, averaging 26.92. Obviously, after the elbow injury, obviously saw a little bit of a downtrot because the injury was significant, but nonetheless, Josh Allen on the ground through the air, the number 1 quarterback. Moving on, let's talk about our number 2 quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. I would immediately take him after Josh Allen if he's taken in front of me, because Patrick Mahomes has the opportunity of being a 400+ point fantasy quarterback. And when you have the ability of having the number 1 overall quarterback on your roster, or someone who could put up 390 to 415 points within a season, you absolutely need to take advantage of that, because once you get the drop off in production at the quarterback position, the separation of value, especially if you're able to invest in Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd round and get the value there, this is a guy that has been a top 4 quarterback in each of the last 3 seasons. Once you are able to get his efforts towards your fantasy team, and you can start off by grabbing a running back and a wide receiver in your first 2 rounds, and you have a little bit of balance there, taking Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd is an incredible position, especially considering in the last 3 years, the guy's averaging 23.5 fantasy points per game, has scored 2 or more touchdowns in 39 of the 49 games he has played, which is an 80% rate. And even with all the Tyreek Hill's gone, now we have Juju and McCole Hardman gone, he is still contributing regardless of who he's throwing the ball to. He has Travis Kelce. That's pretty much all he needs. He gets it done on the ground over the last 3 seasons, averaging 360 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns per season. Yeah, he's not the most dynamic rusher, but the fact that he still gets about 53 fantasy points per season just off rushing statistics alone, I mean, if you want to equate that to passing yards or passing touchdowns, it's a huge influx that separates it from the rest of the pack. Moving on to our number 28, we have Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is the only tight end that has dethroned Travis Kelce in the last 7 seasons, but we're going to see a little bit of a shift of this offense. Hopefully more passing attempts from Lamar Jackson. And if that's going to be the case, of course, we're going to see far more opportunity go in the direction of Mark Andrews, because since Lamar Jackson has become the starting quarterback of this team back in 2019, Mark Andrews has seen a 27% target rate, which is targets per route run. He has seen a 25% red zone target share within this offense since 2019. All he has to do is have a healthy Lamar Jackson. With Lamar Jackson healthy, averaging 12.5 fantasy points per game in the last 20 games that they've played together in the last 2 seasons. Todd Monken, the new offensive coordinator, will help elevate this offense in comparison to the run-first scheme that Greg Roman was approaching with in the last couple of years. Mark Andrews, as the number 1 receiving offense of a great team, should be incredible this year. Moving on to our number 29, the 3rd and only other quarterback we're going to mention on today's video, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts was incredible the last 2 seasons. Now, if he had dodged all the injuries, he probably would be in the conversation of someone that could be number 1 once again. And that's why he is in this conversation. When you have the ability to draft a quarterback that can finish as the number 1 overall quarterback within a season, you absolutely should take that opportunity and draft them. This is a guy that prior to his injury, weeks 1 through 15 of last year, was averaging 26.4 fantasy points per game. In the last 2 seasons, averaging 875 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns per game on average. If you expand it throughout a 17-game season, those are the kind of numbers that you would potentially expect to see. Those are numbers that a lot of other quarterbacks cannot accumulate. And the fact that he has so many incredible receiving options surrounding him, whether it's A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, now DeAndre Swift, beyond the best offensive line in the National Football League, Jalen Hurts, in my mind, is an automatic top 36 selection, specifically number 29. Moving on to number 30, Najee Harris. Najee Harris, when he was healthy, when he took the plate out of his shoe in week 6 of the 2022 fantasy football season, after that point, he was averaging 20 touches per game, averaging 13.41 fantasy points per game, and was the number 12 overall running back in terms of points per game on average. That is why I have him here at number 30. He's the number 12 back off the board in my mind because he has incredible value. He's associated with an offense that has shown the history of wanting to give their primary running back 70 or more percent of the offensive opportunities within this backfield, and additionally 70 or more percent of the fantasy points that are attributed to a Pittsburgh Steelers backfield. I understand the implementation of Jaylen Warren last season definitely did throw a wrench into that overall kind of upside for Najee Harris, but we have seen Le'Veon Bell, D'Angelo Williams, James Conner, and even Najee Harris back in 2021 be able to put up great numbers as the primary back. They're going to go back to that this upcoming season. The number one thing I wanted to mention regarding Najee Harris, last season, he had 7 different opportunities in which he was tackled down at the 1-yard line. Later on in those drives, he did not score a touchdown. So that means there were 7 potential touchdowns that were taken away from his overall scoreline. If you just add 7 touchdowns to Najee Harris' end of season overall fantasy points last year, would have finished as a top 7 back, even without all those receptions and Jaylen Warren in the mix. Najee Harris is a valuable back within that offense that should be improving with Kenny Pickett taking some steps forward this year. Let's move on to the final 6 prospects for today's episode, beginning with Aaron Jones, our number 31. Aaron Jones has been a top 12 fantasy running back each of the last 4 years. Additionally, in the last 4 seasons, has been the number 2 receiving option in terms of targets and receptions for the Green Bay Packers. He's going to continue to get that level of opportunity. Anytime Aaron Jones has had 50% or more of the offensive snaps since 2019, he's averaged 16.18 fantasy points per game. And even though there is the creeping, overall opportunity of A.J. Dillon getting more red zone attempts, more rushing attempts, and of course more targets out of this backfield, as that continues to grow over the years, we are still going to see both these running backs coexist and Aaron Jones be the primary, because this team since 2019 has been number 6 overall in terms of running back rushing attempts, number 8 overall in terms of running back targets. There's enough opportunity to go around, and they certainly can both coexist and still find value for Aaron Jones as the number probably 2 receiving option on this team this upcoming season after Christian Watson. That receiving upside, especially if he's able to find the end zone, should be an extremely valuable back. Moving on to our number 32, we have Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley, again, back in 2020 with Matt Ryan as a member of the Falcons, averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game throughout that season. Now you add him to an offense that targeted their receivers the 7th most times. You have a target vacancy of 102 total targets with no more Manhurts, Arnold, and Marvin Jones Jr. If, in fact, Calvin Ridley is going to step up and, like we have seen at camp, be the number 1 receiving option playing on the outside, Trevor Lawrence taking that year 3 jump like we have seen from Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks over the last couple of years get a stud wide receiver and take a year 3 jump. That is going to be the case here, and Calvin Ridley is going to immediately be the number 1 receiving option within this offense. And like we witnessed with Christian Kirk last year, that could be very valuable for fantasy purposes. Moving on to T. Higgins at number 33. T. Higgins in 2022, when healthy, in the 13 healthy games, basically excluding the games in which he left early with an injury, those 3 games in which he had 26% of the snap counts, 15%, and 1%. In the 13 healthy games, averaged 13.86 fantasy points per game. If you expand that upon a 17-game season, the guy is an easy top 12 wide receiver. Can this offense support two top 12 wide receivers with him and Jamar Chase? Absolutely. Quarterbacks who have supported 2 top 12 wide receiver options since 2008 have averaged about 4,600 passing yards and 32 passing touchdowns. Joe Burrow could very easily accomplish that, if not go for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns this year. That is Joe Burrow's potential ceiling of production. I think that a lot of people overlook T. Higgins because Jamar Chase's existence within that offense, but you got to understand that this team passes the ball a bunch. And as Jamar Chase is pulling double coverage, T. Higgins sees more and more opportunities and is finding himself a lot of success within this offense. Moving on. Amari Cooper could very easily end up being a receiver that proves us all wrong based on where we have him in terms of our overall rankings. Last season, with 7 or more targets, was averaging 15.19 fantasy points per game. I expected him to see 7 or more targets per game on average with Deshaun Watson. I mean, what Deshaun Watson was able to do with DeAndre Hopkins back from 2017 to 2019. Hopkins in those 2 years, 2018 and 2019, was the number 2 and number 5 ranked wide receiver in fantasy football, averaging 16.28 fantasy points per game. Will Fuller from 2017 through 2020, of course, was an absolute monster, averaging 20.25 fantasy points per game in the 31 games that he played with Deshaun Watson. Brandon Cooks played extremely well with Deshaun Watson. There has been history of success, so why not Amari Cooper coming off the best statistical season of his career last year, setting a lot of career highs. Moving on to number 35, Devonta Smith. Even though A.J. Brown is going to gather majority of the opportunities and or utilization, especially in the deep ball receiving game, with Dallas Goedert being fully healthy for the entirety of the season, potentially, DeAndre Swift getting himself more utilization in the receiving game, and maybe even more targets in the direction of A.J. Brown. Devonta Smith averaging 12.18 fantasy points per game last season was incredible. But is it going to be possible for this team to have another repeat season of 2 top 12 wide receivers? It is going to be very difficult to, potentially have that on hand, especially considering there's so much elite talent at the wide receiver position currently in the fantasy landscape. So I'm going to be a little bit more conservative. We have Devonta Smith still in this conversation of being a top 16 guy. Just keep in mind, there are a lot of mouths to feed within that offense, especially Jalen Hurts down in the red zone, scoring himself a lot of points with his legs. So with that all taken into account, yes, Devonta Smith was incredible the last 2 seasons as a member of this team. But in my opinion, I'm expecting him to take a little bit of a backseat in comparison to the overall insane production that this offense had last year. Moving on, the final option we wanted to mention is Miles Sanders. We talked about him a lot earlier this week in regards to a running back that is not only going to be a 3-down back, in association with Frank Wright, the head coach / play caller, with Deuce Staley, his running backs coach. Obviously used to be his running backs coach back in Philadelphia. I'm expecting Miles Sanders to be a 3-down back. I mean, there was even an interview that they had when they brought in Miles Sanders, where the general manager was talking to Miles Sanders saying, hey, we expect you to get 50 receptions this year. When that's going to be the case, he is going to be easily in this top conversation of the running back position, regardless of the fact that he's no longer associated with the Philadelphia Eagles. In the last, 4 or 5 years of his career, Miles Sanders, 2018 through 2022, whenever he's been given 15 or more opportunities in a game, averaging 14.9 fantasy points per game. The upside's certainly there, and the opportunity will be there within this Carolina Panthers offense. All right, thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already. Be sure to click the like button down below if you appreciated today's content. Of course, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy if you guys have not yet already. Don't forget the link is down in the description. When you use code Andrew to sign up and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, you're going to get my 2023 Fantasy Football Draft Guide, the rankings, the weekly updated rankings, whether it's this offseason or going from weeks 1 through 18 of the regular season. All of that in order to help you win a 2023 Fantasy Football Championship. So take advantage of the opportunity on hand today. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.